Welcome back to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, where you'll find information on what's going on the North Fork of Long Island. We'll be focusing on issues and opportunities going on in the community, as well as people and stories from the present and the past. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for our guest today, we have Chef Rosa Ross. She's been living on the North Fork for quite a while now, and she talks about her ancestry and growing up in Hong Kong and how she got interested in cooking along the way and eventually how she made it out onto the North Fork, and talks about some of the cookbooks she did as well as what she's working on now. So I hope you enjoy episode 23 with Rosa Ross. So tell me where you were born and raised.
I was born in Hong Kong when it was a British colony, and I grew up there. I left when I was 25, I think, 24, and I went to England to live because I was going to get married. And I wasn't interested in cooking. I didn't know how to cook. I didn't know how to do anything in the kitchen.
Okay.
Until I went to live in Italy, and then I loved going to the markets because they were very much like markets in Hong Kong. And then I went to live in the country, in Lake Majore, and I had nothing to do all day, so I cooked.
But what about were your parents from Hong Kong?
My ethnic background is Macanese. They are Portuguese from Macau, but obviously there was intermarriage, although the Portuguese are all Catholic, and all they show is the baptismal certificates. So on paper, there is no evidence of intermarriage with Asian populations, but obviously on the face of the people there is. Originally, all the Macanese are descended from the original 400 families that settled in Macau. And Macau was settled at the time of Elizabeth I, and it was given to the Portuguese by the empress, and it was the only place in China that foreigners could set foot on land. And are you able to track your grandparents? Yeah, all the way back. All the way back. My great-grandfather was quite illustrious. He was an architect, and he built the governor's palace, the cathedral in Macau that they have now, and his name is, on the foundation thing.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
He was quite well off and quite well known, but sadly we didn't inherit any of the money. By the time it got around to us, it was mostly gone. But his name is on those buildings. And so how was it growing up for you in school there? Was it what type of school system? Well, we followed the British system. I went to school that was run by American missionary nuns. Their mission was to go to China, but when they had to go through Hong Kong in the 20s. So when they got to Hong Kong, they had to wait, I don't know, for visas, I suppose. And there were 6 original Maryknoll nuns, and the Bishop of Hong Kong asked them to start a school while they were waiting to get their papers to go to China. So they started a school for girls, and most of the girls that enrolled were Macanese girls of Portuguese descent, from Macau. Yes. That they were the original pupils. And the school still exists today. It's a very well-known school, and it's the building is a heritage site, World Heritage Site. But nowadays it has, wealthy Chinese students mostly. Mostly wealthy Chinese students. Yes. But when I went to school, it was run by the nuns, and it was a very mixed bag. We had very wealthy and very poor. And did you
know what you kind of wanted to do? You were thinking of doing?
No, I never thought I wanted to cook. Well, we had servants, so we
Okay.
weren't actually allowed to cook. They didn't want us messing in the kitchen. I did learn how to make cakes, but that was about it. When I went to England to live, I obviously wanted to eat the food I was familiar with. So I learned to cook.
And why did you move to England
To get married
to get
for
married?
love.
Did you meet your?
No, I met my husband in Hong Kong and he was Australian, but he went to live in England. And, so I went. That's why I went to England. I was very lucky because I worked for British Airways, which was BOAZ at the time. And we had to send a report every month on what we did. And my boss in London was a guy I worked for in Hong Kong. So when I sent the monthly report and the last item, it said staff changes, and they said I had resigned because I was going to London to live. And so he sent a teletype back saying, did I intend to work? And I said, yes. And so he said, would I work for him? And I said, only if he gave me a free ticket. So they transferred me to London and I got a free ticket. But actually, I took a pay cut.
Okay.
But he loved my going there because when I arrived on a Sunday and I went to work on Monday and he didn't have anybody working there for him for 6 weeks. So the desk was piled high with papers, but I knew his system, so I just put everything in order. So when he came back, everything was done.
And how long were you in England for?
About 2 or 3 years, and then my husband went to live in Milan because he got all these job offers. It was in the 60s during the boom in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And so I left British Airways and I went to live in Milan.
And then you said there you started getting interested in cooking?
Well, the second day I was there, they asked me to go to what they called Chinatown to arrange a dinner for, my husband worked with Marcella Hazan's husband, but she wasn't a cooking person. So I went to what they call Chinatown was actually one street, expecting to see food shops and stuff. And when I got there at lunchtime, everything was closed and there wasn't a food shop in sight. And what the Chinese did there is they worked in the leather goods. So I was walking up and down the street. I couldn't speak any Italian. And I saw a Chinese boy on a bike. So I stopped him and I started to talk to him in Cantonese, but he couldn't speak anything but Italian. But I wouldn't let him go. So finally he took me to a building and we went across this courtyard and we went upstairs and there were all these people working leather goods. And he took me to the back and there was an old woman who could speak Cantonese. And I asked her about the restaurant and she told the boy he couldn't speak Chinese. And he took me to the restaurant, which was only open at night. So we knocked on the door and they were so happy to see me, they invited me to have lunch with them. So I went in and I had this terrific Chinese lunch with them. And then they told me, and then I told them I was going to bring all these people back for dinner. And they said, well, we'll make the food, but we won't put so many authentic ingredients because they're very expensive. Like we just cook for you. So that evening we went back for dinner, like 20 people, and they sat me next to Marcella Hazan because she could speak English. And I was pregnant. So she asked me if I knew Dr. Spark. And I said, no, I didn't because I didn't live in America. So she said, oh, I'll lend you my Dr. Spark. And so we became friends. And so she came. And then when I had my daughter, it was in a clinic and she arrived a day later than the doctor scheduled. He scheduled a cesarean. So he had to come in the middle of the night and deliver the baby. And all I had were these English style nightgowns with string at the bottom. And she was very small, and the Italians didn't know how to use these clothing. So Marcella came to visit me, so they sent her out to buy a Italian layette for my daughter.
Mhm.
And so we became friends.
Wow. How is Marcella Hazan
As a friend?
as a friend?
Oh, she was a lovely friend. We had, we spent a lot of time together because our husbands worked together, and I didn't know very much about food. I don't even think I was that interested, frankly. So we would go out to restaurants, and I would say, "How do you make this?" And she would tell me,
Mm.
And then when we came to America, I lived in California and she lived in New York. But my husband used to travel to New York quite often and see her husband Victor. So he bought me Marcella's first cookbook, which when I read it was just like having a conversation with Marcella, because I was familiar with all the recipes, but it was actually Victor who wrote the book because I was
Wow.
familiar with his style. So I would call her up from New York and we would talk and this and that. And then eventually I came to live in New York, but by then she was living in Venice. But she would come and teach at Peter Comes, and I would see her there, and I took her to Chinatown. And so
Mhm.
we maintained our friendship, for
Okay.
until she died.
Yes. And how long were you in Milan?
About 3 years, and then we moved to Bavaria, to
Oh.
Bad Wiese outside Munich. My husband got transferred there, and it was what they called a creative workshop, and there were 5 partners, and they each had separate creative projects, and it was the boom in Europe, and we stayed in Bad Wiese for about a year and a half, and then they closed it down, and they sent us to Frankfurt, and then from Frankfurt they sent us to the United States. He worked for McCann Erickson.
And then you were in California.
And then we were in California, and then we moved around a bit, and eventually we ended up in New York.
And when would you say you started
Cooking?
getting interested in the cooking?
Well, obviously, when I lived in Italy, we went to live on Lake Maggiore, and I had nothing to do all day, so I would translate all my recipes from English and cook because I had nothing to do.
Yeah.
So, and I would just make stuff that would take 2 days to make and things like that. And I found it quite challenging because I didn't have a stove. I had to bake on top of the stovetop. I had like a big sort of dome thing, and I would make cakes in it. So it was quite interesting. And I learned to speak Italian, colloquially, so they could all understand me. And they would tell me how to cook.
And were they friendly?
Oh, they were lovely. They were wonderful people. I loved living out there, and I didn't have to garden because when I went there, the Italians are very diet conscious. So
Yeah.
I had just started introducing my daughter was a little baby to eggs. And they said I had to have a fresh egg every day and give her just a little bit of the yolk to see, bit by bit. So I went and asked them where I could get a fresh egg. And they said, oh, there's a woman, she'll bring you one every day. So every day she brought me a fresh egg warm from a nest. And at the weekends, I would buy a dozen. So she saw I would get 2 bread rolls delivered every morning. The town was like a kilometer away, and the boy would ride down in a bike and deliver me 4 bread rolls for breakfast because I thought 2 was too little. So I had all this leftover bread, which I was throwing out. And the old woman, Natalina was her name, she said, will you give me the bread? I said, of course, I'm just throwing it out. So she took the bread, and in exchange, she would bring me a dozen eggs at the weekend, and she would let me go to her garden and pick all the fresh produce I wanted. So I
Oh,
didn't have
wow.
to keep a garden. I could just go there and get salad or whatever. And she taught me how to make a lot of dishes.
Were most
Stovetop.
of them Italian dishes, northern?
Yes, they were all Italian dishes. She taught me how to roast on a deep pot on top of the oven, on top of the stove, because I didn't have an oven. So at Christmas time, I had to send the turkey to the baker, and he baked it for me. So I would prepare the whole turkey, and then my husband would take it up to the baker, and he would bake it and send it back ready to serve.
Wow, that's
So that was
amazing.
pretty good.
And did you get to travel to other parts of Italy, even more towards Rome and southern Italy?
Yes, I went to Rome. I went to southern Italy. I even went to Pantelleria before it was fashionable. And my husband went skin diving there. And they don't have drinking water. They used to bring it in by the Italian Navy would bring a shipload every 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
It was an interesting trip.
And would you say that the Italian cuisine that was going on at the time, is that similar to the contemporary
Well, it was very regional.
regional back then?
Yeah.
To
Like in the whole of Milan, I had to go all over to look for a pizza.
because that was still more in Naples.
Yes, was the
Uh,
southern thing. In Milan, they cook with not so much with olive oil, but with oil and butter. They use much more butter. But they make minestrone, with
mhm,
rice, not with noodles.
mhm,
And they serve it in the summertime. It's a lovely dish. They serve it at room temperature,
mm.
minestrone. And they use more butter with their cooking and cream
Yes,
than the Southern Italians.
I
And
think,
they eat more meat.
and that's probably linked with more being close to Germany, Switzerland, France, and
Well, and also because in Milan was the industrial center, and they were rich. You know,
yeah.
all the Southern Italians went to work in Milan because they didn't have jobs in Southern Italy.
So when you moved out to California, when was that? What year?
Well, when what happened was my husband got moved to work outside Munich in a thing called it was a work they called it a workshop. It was a thing. They had 5 partners, and these were 5 guys. They worked in this creative workshop, and it wasn't an agency. They took projects and they worked on those. And my husband worked on instant breakfast. He introduced that to Germany. Carnation instant breakfast.
Instant breakfast?
Yes, yeah, that was his project, one of his first projects. I don't know that the Germans took to it very much, and he used to travel a lot, and it was a great life in Bavise. We lived. They rented. They took a lease on a what was a guest house, and they kept 4 bedrooms filled with Bavarian painted furniture for guests. They kept the chef and a couple of maids, and then they kept the 5 partners. And every day they had breakfast, lunch, and drinks. They had a little wine room, all included. And they, just for these 5 guys, they would fire up this giant commercial stove and cook lunch for these 5 people who
Oh,
mostly
wow.
wanted grilled cheese sandwiches or something simple.
Yes.
And they had a housekeeper. So
And how would you say it was adjusting from living in Italy to living in the region of Bavaria, with the people and the culture?
Well, Munich is a beautiful city, and
Mhm.
it was like an hour away. So we often went into Munich for lunch or whatever, go to the museums and this and that. I'll have dinner.
Would you go to
I'll go to a nightclub.
a nightclub?
Yeah.
What about the October festival?
Oktoberfest was just drinking beer like mad. But you know what they had that was wonderful beer. They had the beer that they brewed that morning. And
Oh,
it's the
wow.
most wonderful beer you could drink. Smooth and velvety and delicious, absolutely delicious.
Wow.
And
So,
they had sausages, of course, sausages galore. And they had this habit. They had things, cafes called conditoris, where you went in mid-morning and mid-afternoon for coffee and cake. And you always had to have two cakes, a high fancy cake and a low cake.
is that for different times?
Well, you went mid-morning and in the afternoon.
Oh,
You could have
okay.
hot chocolate with whipped cream. It was delicious. Well, everybody went to the conditori. They all went out for tea.
Oh,
They,
okay.
yeah, it was busy. And then they would have their main meal at lunchtime, and then they would have a lighter meal at night.
And did you learn any cooking in
In
Germany?
Bavaria, yeah, I did. I did. I like the German food.
Yes.
Liked it. It's not, it's not really stodgy as they say. It's actually very good.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've
And we lived at where Bavise is only like an hour from Austria, from Salzburg. So when we had visitors from New York, we would tell them to bring their passports and we would take them to Salzburg for dinner, and we had to go across the border and show our papers and all. They loved that.
Wow.
Just to have dinner and then come back.
Yes. So I guess, yeah, let's can move to the US.
So then they closed the workshop down because even in the 60s, can you imagine it cost them 500,000 US dollars to run it for five
Wow.
people? So finally, the German office,
Crazy.
which was paying the bill, said, "We're not paying this anymore." And so they shut it down. And they
Right.
gave everybody 6 months' salary, but they didn't give my husband anything. And they sent us to Frankfurt, and then from Frankfurt, they transferred us to California, where they started a similar sort of workshop thing. And my husband worked there for a while, and then he went. Oh, and then, no, we were in California. We went to California. I don't know, he was working there. And then they sent us to South America. So we stayed in Caracas for about a year. But the day we landed in Caracas, my husband Ron got bombarded with job offers to go back to California. So he was working in Caracas, and it's very corrupt down there. So the manager of the office and the accountant, they were taking kickbacks, and they were moving into new offices, and they wanted my husband to take kickbacks too, but he didn't want to. So he said, well, maybe I should write to New York and tell them what's going on. And I said, no, you can't, because you don't actually know who hired these people. If you write and the person that hired them is the one you write to, what are you going to do? So he just said, okay, I'll quit and go back to LA because there's so many job offers there. So that's what we did.
But you said it, I mean, you were only in Caracas for 1 year,
About a year, yeah.
about a year.
And
And
then we left.
but
But it was nice down there. It's beautiful, Caracas. I mean, there was a lot of poverty,
Yes.
because everybody, it was, they had the oil, and all the other South American countries had people come to work there. They had work, but they didn't. So there was extreme poverty and extreme wealth.
And that's like out of all the places you've lived, that seemed like that was the most extreme that you saw in terms of poverty and wealth compared
Oh, I came from Asia. Are you kidding me?
to
You don't see poverty like you see in Asia. Oh my God.
in
In Hong Kong,
in
people live
Hong
on the
Kong.
streets. They share bed space. Do you
Wow.
know that they rent this bed and they share it? So you get it during the day and somebody else gets it at night or
Wow.
whatever.
And it's the level of density and just putting people into smaller.
Well, you have to hand it to the British. Before 1949, Hong Kong had a population of only like 600,000 people. But when the communists took over China, the British opened the doors and people just streamed in. Refugees just streamed in, and they couldn't handle it. So people were living on the sidewalks, on rooftops, and on the hillsides. They built all these shanty towns. Still, they had a terrible fire. I think it was a Christmas Day, and the whole hillside burned down. And then they started building concrete block houses for these people. And eventually they built them apartment blocks, they call them resettlement areas.
So it wasn't like that until after the communists took over.
After 1949.
After
Before that, Hong Kong was a duty-free port, and all the business was import-export. It didn't manufacture stuff. In fact, it got everything, even a lot of their food, from China and other places. They got rice from the Mekong Delta and things like that. They imported a lot of stuff. That was their business. They were duty-free. So you could buy a Swiss watch in Hong Kong cheaper than you could buy it in Switzerland. You could buy a Rolex for $100.
It's fascinating seeing like a glimpse of what Hong Kong was like at that time.
It is fascinating. Actually, it doesn't exist anymore. It's all gone. I went to Hong Kong. I went back once in 1961, and then I didn't go back until 1995. And I was so depressed. I locked myself in my room for 3 days because I couldn't recognize anything. And then finally, I said, my sister was there. So finally I said, oh, I'll just treat myself as a tourist, and don't look for anything I know.
Any recognizable structures and
exactly, because it had changed so much.
Yeah.
And they were always pulling buildings up and down. So I said one day, my sister was there, I said, let's go to where I used to work, Alexandra House. And she said, forget it. They pulled that building up and down 3 times since you were there. It's a different completely. So we didn't.
And then did you go back to Macau?
That time I did, yeah. I went to Macau. And the old parts of Macau, where we lived in Macau as refugees during the war. So I went to the hotel that was the refugee center, and the room that we stayed in didn't change at all, even had the same furniture in it, I think. And our family of 5 lived in it. And then that part of Macau didn't change much because it's part of the UNESCO heritage site. And then we went to Hong Kong, but it was a meeting organized by this Macau. When the Portuguese had Macau, they had the government, the gambling concession, which they rented or gave to somebody called Stanley Ho. That's how he made all this money. And they also got money from it. And they put all this money in a thing called the Orient Foundation. So they had all this money and they didn't know what to do with it. So they started sponsoring these meetings in Hong Kong for old Macanese families. They gave them a stipend to finance the reunions. So I went in 1995. I went since I left Hong Kong. I only went back in 61 and 95, and I never went back again.
Yeah. And now it's probably changed even
Now I don't even
more.
want to go back. Completely changed.
No.
I mean, even in 95, it had changed a lot.
Well, how long were you in California?
Actually, quite long, about 5 years.
In Los Angeles?
Yeah. We lived in Malibu. It was very nice. And I had my second daughter was born there in Santa Monica.
And did you do any cooking
No, I
with?
didn't cook professionally. I didn't do anything. I did have a job, and nobody I had this job. It was wonderful. My family all went off to do their thing, and my job started at 10 o'clock and it ended at 2. So I was gone from 10 till 3. So I was home. I didn't even have to tell them I had this job. And I worked for this very wealthy man. His family had come from Germany before 1939 with 5 truckloads of valuables. And they stayed in the Connaught Hotel in London for like 2 years. And then they moved to California. And he had developed a lot of real estate. And I just worked for him. He was like just handling his family's affairs and his own properties and things. He wasn't doing much. And I went in at 10 o'clock and I was home by 3. So it was a great job. And he was an extremely nice man.
And so how did you end up deciding to go to New York? Because you said your husband wanted
Well,
to
my
go.
husband worked for, originally we came to America because he worked for McCann Erickson. And then he left because we wanted to come back from Venezuela. And he got offered another job in LA. So we left and he took the other job. And eventually we came, after, a bit of moving around, we ended up in New York.
Yes.
And, but he never actually went back to work for McCann Erickson. He worked for different companies.
And then what did he work for in New York?
Well, at first he worked for a company called Kenyon and Eckhart. And originally he was an art director, but he preferred writing. So he became a copywriter. And that's what he did until he retired.
And where did you live in New York?
Well, I didn't want to live in a suburb. So I put my children in private school and we lived in Brooklyn Heights. And they went to Packer. And so I earned good money in those days, but most of my money went to pay for their school fees, which is very expensive. 2 kids in private school. But I felt that the schools in the 70s were so dangerous. And I just felt it was better for them to get a good education and early than to save all the money to go to college, They needed a better
They needed
grounding.
better grounding before going to college, and
Exactly.
the
And they
public
needed a
schools.
safe environment. They couldn't go to school with kids bringing guns and stuff like that.
And
So
this was in the late 70s,
it was in the mid-70s
mid
that we
70s.
moved to New York. So we lived in Brooklyn Heights and I sent them to Packer, which was a traditional, school. But they had very good teachers at Packer. And it used to be like an all-girls school, but by the time my kids went there, it was a co-educational school. And I think they did get a good education, a good traditional education.
Mm-hmm. And did you feel that Brooklyn Heights was a nice area?
Oh, it was lovely because it was very safe. The kids could walk to school and walk home because I worked in an office, so I wasn't there, you know. So they pretty much looked after themselves.
You
I didn't
work,
get home until after 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock.
where
I
did
worked
you
in an
work?
advertising agency
In
called
Manhattan?
Advertising to Women, yeah. And the funny thing is, when I come to New York from Boston, and I had all these introductions, but I didn't use them because I wanted to try and get a job by myself. So I spent a month temping, and I did a different, temp job so that I could get a feel for what kind of job I wanted. And then finally, I just thought, well, out of courtesy, I need to call on this man. So I went to see him. And when I mentioned some names, he said, why didn't you come and get a job here right from the beginning? Because you know all these people. And I said, well, I didn't want to do that because I wanted to get a job on my own. And so he hired me. And that evening, they happened to have a cocktail party because they got some new business. So they invited me to stay for the party, I said, well, you don't really need to have a big party just because you hired me. Which he thought was quite funny. And then I went to work for him the chief financial officer was working for him and reporting to him. And I worked for her. And that I stayed there for about 2 or 3 years. And
Oh,
then one day I went into work and I noticed she had hired all these people, two or three people, and they were doing my job. So I got really angry and I went in and confronted her and said, why are you hiring all these people to do my job? And now you have to hire 3 people to do my job, which I was doing, one person. And she intimated that I didn't do something that she wanted me to do.
mm,
I refused to do it. And so she was just taking the job from under me. So I went to the chairman of the board who I knew, and I told him that I was going to quit, and this was the reason. And he immediately gave me a freelance assignment.
yeah.
And so I just left.
And at this time, after you left there,
So I left there was like April, and I was going to do something in my home, like give classes or something. And I realized that it was the summer holidays and no one was interested in doing any classes because all the children were home from school. So I decided that, I ran ads in the New York Times, and a guy called me and asked me if I would go and cater a dinner for him. And so I drove up to see him. He lived in Yonkers, and he had 2 kitchens, and one was on the ground floor outside the pool, and he wanted a pool party. But he said, I want real Chinese food. And I said, what do you want? And he wanted like these really ordinary things like beef and broccoli, wonton soup, and things like that. So I said, fine. So I said, okay, I'll come back, and do the party, whatever. And I was leaving, and he said, don't you want some money? And I said, oh, that would be nice. And he went up and he got $600 in cash and gave it to me. And I was really shocked because I had never, ever been paid for something I didn't already do. And I thought as I was driving away, I could just take this $600 and never come back. But of course I
yeah.
didn't. I went and I did the party, and he was really thrilled. And subsequently I did like 3 other parties. And then one day a guy called me and he wanted to be a waiter at one of my parties. And I said, fine. And I was chatting to him. And he said, well, you do know the formula for costing these jobs out, don't you? And I said, no, I don't. And he gave me the formula. So I went back and I worked the formula on all the pricing I had done, and I was well within the formula. So I talked to him for a long time, and he actually told me a lot about how to cost out jobs and things like that. So
I see.
I decided that I would cater jobs because they were very lucrative.
Mm,
And this in the summer, nobody wanted to take cooking classes because all the children were out of school and the mothers had to stay home. So I
mm.
started catering. And I
Yeah.
found that I made good money catering, you know.
Is that what you ended up calling walk on wheels?
Yes, because I decided that if I took the Chinese kitchen with me, it was limited. You know, I took a wok and some cleavers and chopping boards. If I took a French kitchen with me, I would have more equipment than I could possibly carry. So I put all this stuff in a basket, put it on a wheelie thing, and just wheeled it. And how I structured it is, if you got the class together, say you and three of your friends or four of your friends, I came to your kitchen and gave the class every week. And then I gave you a discount. And in the end, I left you all the ingredients.
Mm,
So you got a benefit out of organizing the class,
yes,
you know? So that's why I called it Walk on Wheels.
yes.
Mhm.
And how long did you do that? How many
Well,
years?
I did it until people decided they didn't want to take cooking classes out. Well, then it became the summer. And I realized that women weren't going to do cooking classes because the kids were home from school. So I just concentrated on the catering. And then Peter called me and asked me if I wanted to teach at his school. And I was spending like one whole day just organizing the paperwork and all my classes. So I knew I was going to make a lot less money. But I just thought, oh, I'll go and teach at a school and I don't need to be bothered with all of this, you know, and he'll just pay me for the classes. And even though it was a lot less money, I decided I would do that. So
Mm,
I basically made my money from catering, not from cooking not from cooking classes. But I enjoyed doing the classes, you know, I liked doing them. So that's how I started teaching at Peter's. And then he asked me if I wanted to teach French cooking, and I said, fine. And I started to teach his course, you know.
and this was Peter.
Oh, no, he didn't ask me. I asked him because he only gave me the Asian classes to teach. And so I said, well, why don't you give me some French technique classes? Because there were more of those. And he said, well, but you're not French. And I said, well, neither are you know.
Yeah,
So he gave
yeah.
me the French classes to teach.
And this is Peter Beard.
No, Peter Kump
Peter
was a friend
sorry.
of Beard's. And he
Oh,
owned the cooking school that is now called ICE.
oh, okay.
Okay. So then Peter died. I think he got stomach cancer. He died in the late 90s. And he left everything to his son, who lives in California and didn't want any of it. So the son sold everything. But
Oh,
essentially, the thing that was really valuable was the mailing list that he had,
hmm.
not the old junk equipment and stuff like that. But he had a great mailing list that was years in the making. So he sold the school to Rick Smiler.
But so you got to do other things and not just be categorized into just doing Asian food.
No, I taught Italian cooking and
Yeah,
French cooking and Asian cooking as well. But I taught other cuisine.
yeah.
Well, at first they didn't want to let me teach it. And then I said, well, you guys are French and you're teaching French. So why can't I teach French? I know it better than than probably than you do. And I
And you
certainly
do.
know Italian cooking better than you do. And so I
Hmm.
started teaching. Oh, and the Italian teacher, Anna Teresa, backed me up. She said, yeah, Rosa, no, she fills in for me when I can't do the class. So
Mm.
I taught those other classes as well.
And they were popular, the classes.
Yeah, they were popular. And I would do 1 week workshops and things like that.
Mm. Have
Well,
you
when I
ever,
started teaching at Peters, even though I made a lot less money teaching, I just taught there. I didn't bother to teach at home anymore.
and
So,
through this time, had you visited Chinatown during the period that you moved?
yes, I went to Chinatown all the time. What I did was I took my class to Chinatown on a shopping trip. That's how I started. I wrote Beyond Bok Choy. So
Oh,
I would
yes.
take them on a trip to Chinatown and I would introduce them to all the vegetables and things we would walk around. And then we would have a dim sum lunch and then we would go back to school. So, and I would, teach them when we got back, we did some shopping. And when we got back to school, I would teach them how to cook with the stuff we bought, which a
Mhm,
lot of time was vegetables. And
mhm.
one of my assistants, which I didn't know this, was a food editor at Workman Publishing. So one day I went to some event and I was early and she was there. And so she was the only person I knew. So we were talking in the corner and I found out she was a food editor, which I didn't know that, which was stupid of me, even though she was my assistant for years. And then she asked me if I was interested in doing a book on Chinese vegetables. And one of my friends, Paul Grimes, a dear friend of mine, was down there visiting them with an idea. He was trying to sell them a book. And he was talking to the editor, and he saw that they were selling this vegetable book, that they were doing this book on Chinese vegetables. So when he left, he told me to call them and said, they want someone to do this book on vegetables, so you should just sell them on your ideas, which I did, and they bought it and they did my book, Beyond
Mhm.
Bok Choy.
Wow. That's how the book came about.
Yeah, well, in those days when, me and my colleagues and people my age were all active, we all knew each other and we would talk all the time. That's how, I knew the editor the editor at Artisan was my assistant at Peter Combs. So I knew her. You know what I mean? So it
Yes.
was very easy to just pick up the phone and say, hey, I hear you doing this book. Why didn't you hire me to do it? Something like that.
Yes.
Mhm.
And also before that, when you were teaching the French or Italian, like for the Italian, for example, would you take them to Little Italy, or was it not worth the
I
trip?
would take them. I would take them. Usually we would go to Chinatown. We would have a dim sum lunch. Then we would go to Little Italy and have dessert and coffee. And we would go, they had this very famous cheese shop called De Paolo's in Italy. And we would go there and buy cheese and talk to those people. And the students loved it because they didn't have to go to the classroom. But then we
Yes.
would come back with all the stuff and cook, do a class on what we bought, you know,
Yes.
mm-hmm. Which was
And
mostly Chinese vegetables.
and then so after you created that cookbook, or when did you move to Long
Well,
Island?
when we lived in California, we had a friend in California. My husband had a friend who grew up out here, and he used to sail with my husband. And so when we moved to New York, he invited us out here. And my husband bought a boat before he bought anything else. And we used to stay at his house and sleep on the boat. That's how we knew the area. And we came out here to sail more than anything else. And I wasn't going to come out here and start doing housework. So I said we should look for a house that is very modern and we don't need to do anything. And we met this realtor at Saks. And she said, oh, since we're here, let me take you to this house. And we drove across this farm field, and the house was completely blanketed by trees. It was June. And when I walked into the garden, it was really, they had a lot of sweet smelling shrubs, and it was beautiful. It was like the secret garden, and the
Mm.
house was all closed up. So we went through the house, and she said, and the shower where all the plaster was falling down, they just had a curtain. And I said, what kind of furnace that do they have? And she said, oil. And I said, oh, let's go see. So we went down, and there was all ashes in the furnace and a pile of kindling. And I said, what oil are you talking about? So we had to put in the oil furnace. We did all the electricity again, and we modernized the kitchen before we moved in. So we actually closed on the house in, well, they said we'll close on the house if you close immediately. And we said, fine, but then they didn't close until November. But they cashed our money. So by November, the price had gone up, but they were forced to close at the price that they agreed. And they didn't close until 2004, I think. They just disappeared because they wanted to get out of the deal, but they cashed our payment. So they
Yeah.
were forced to close at the
Mm.
original price.
And then what year was this?
1988.
And then that was East
But
Marion.
we couldn't move into the house until the following spring
Oh.
because we had to have work done too. We had all the electricity done,
Hmm.
and we had the kitchen renovated and things like that.
And would you say it was pretty affordable at that time?
What, the house?
The house or the housing market in that area? I guess
Yeah,
maybe.
they were asking 260,000 for a house and 1 acre. And we offered them a little bit more. And they came back with a counter offer that was $30,000 less, based on the theory that we close immediately. So we said, fine, because we wanted to use the house that summer. But then they didn't close until November. So I don't know what was wrong with them, but that was
Yeah.
what happened. So
And
by the time they closed, the value of the land had gone up a lot. And the
yeah.
Greek brothers had actually spent the money that we paid them, so they couldn't renege on the deal. I think that's why they didn't close, because they
Mhm.
wanted to get out of the deal, but they couldn't. So they were forced to close.
And then at this time, how would you describe Greenport area? Some people would say it was a little,
1988.
yeah, in like 1988, people would say it was a little more gritty.
Well, it wasn't a tourist destination. It was quite quiet. Mostly it was local people and people that had homes out here for a long time. We didn't have all the like summer visitors that we had.
Mhm.
It was people like we came out here because some friends of ours had grown up out here and they invited us out. That's how we knew about it. No,
Yeah.
what everyone got off at, they took the jitney to the Hamptons. They didn't
Mhm.
continue out here. You were
Mhm.
lucky if you saw like 2 or 3 cars continuing out to Orient.
Yeah. Compared to today, it's like very different.
Exactly. Mhm.
And then, so after you moved out here, when did you decide that?
Well, I didn't move out here until I decided to take the Rosens, who I knew,
Mhm.
decided to put that space that was Scrimshaw up for rent, and they were going to chop it up into all little stores. And I went in to see them, and I said, you shouldn't do that. I'll rent the whole space. And I was going to make it into a cooking school. So I organized a class. And this, of course, everybody out there knew each other.
Mhm.
So as soon as these people joined my class, which was supposed to run for 4 weeks, they got to know each other. So they would get together between them. And if one couldn't make the class, they would delay it. And so the class, instead of taking 4 weeks, went on for 3 months. So I said, well, obviously I'm not going to make any money doing cooking classes because these people are just arranging the schedule to suit them. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So, I mean, I have to finish the class in 4 weeks and do another class and another class and another class to make it viable. So, and that wasn't happening. So I decided to open the restaurant, which
And
actually somebody suggested to me.
really,
Yeah, which I didn't really want a restaurant.
you wanted more of this cooking
I
school.
wanted this cooking school. Yeah.
Mm.
I had run a restaurant in the city and I made a lot of money. They paid me very, very well. But it was one of those restaurants that was very fashionable. You know, all sorts of people came there. And Madonna's brother was the designer and things like that. So I didn't really want to run another restaurant.
Because you already knew what it was like, and it's a lot of work.
Well, I knew I wasn't going to get paid that kind of money, you know. We had a late night scene and everyone wanted to come to the restaurant because Madonna's brother was there. And sometimes Madonna would come. In fact, I think she had the first party we did. So I didn't really want to have another restaurant. I just wanted to have a cooking school. I mean,
But
I
then,
knew that restaurant work was very hard. You know, you'd have to be there all the time. And I didn't really want that. But no
Yeah.
one knew about cooking classes. They didn't want to take cooking classes. I told you the class was supposed to be 4 weeks. It went on for 3 months. So I thought, well, this isn't going to work either. You know, they just got together and kept delaying the class.
and so now that you ended up opening the restaurant, but did you know what type of restaurant you wanted to open at the time?
Yes, I wanted an American restaurant. I didn't want an Asian restaurant. People wanted me to open a Thai restaurant and this and that. And I said, no one's going to pay if you can go and get Chinese takeout for $5. Why are you going to pay $35 for Chinese food? You don't know the difference. You don't know that mine's better, you know? It's just Chinese food to you. So I
Yes.
had what I called an American restaurant.
And how did you decide on, was it a changing menu?
Well, what happened was I used to only open 5 days a week. And I decided that wasn't working because in the winter, I would just make enough money to pay everybody. And we didn't make any money. In fact, it cost money for me to stay open in the winter because that place was almost impossible to heat. So I decided that we were going to work 7 days a week, which we never did. So I gave my chef the weekend off and told him to go to New York and have a good time with, he was newly married, because after that we were going to work 7 days a week. And when he came back from New York, when he was gone, I went into the kitchen to cook. And there was a young kid that used to work for me on the floor and he wanted to learn to cook. So I had sent him into the kitchen to work and the chef was supposed to be training him. So I went in and I said to him, make me a cup of mayonnaise. And he went in and got 8 eggs and started to make mayonnaise. And I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm making mayonnaise. I said, I don't want 8 cups of mayonnaise. I want 1 cup of mayonnaise. And he didn't know how to do it because the chef, instead of teaching him how to make 1 cup, just made him learn how to make 8 cups because that was what he needed. Do you understand? So I said, you're not learning anything. You're just doing his prep for him. So I got really mad. So when the chef came back from his holiday, I took him to task. I said, you're not teaching this kid what you're supposed to. You're teaching him how to be your assistant and do your prep for you. And he got angry and walked out. So I said, but continued coming in, drinking beer every day. So I said, fine, I'll just go into the kitchen and cook, which is what I did.
You ended up doing
It was
the
July
whole-
3rd. What was I going to do? Even if I got the best chef in New York, he wasn't going to help me. I had to cook the menu. So I just walked in there and cooked myself. And everybody noticed that I was cooking and they liked the food better. So I stayed in the kitchen.
Wow.
Hmm?
Yeah, so you ended up being not just operating the restaurant, but also preparing.
I worked the line. That's what I did. It was really hard work because I would get in there at 11, do all my paperwork and stuff, and go into the kitchen about 1 o'clock and work until 1 in the morning.
Wow.
I worked the hardest in that restaurant, believe me.
Mhm. And while operating the restaurant, what would you say you enjoyed the most from it?
I liked cooking on the line and I enjoyed the rapport with my regular clients. I enjoyed talking to them and greeting them and, making note of what they regularly ordered and this and that. I just
Mhm.
did enjoy that. And I missed that when I gave up the restaurant.
And how long was it in operation?
I opened it in 2014 and I closed it in 2016.
Okay. And after, had you done any other, I think, I don't know if I remember this right, but you had the one cookbook beyond bok choy, but were you working
I
on
had 3 cookbooks. I
three
had Beyond
cookbooks?
Bok Choy. I had One Pot Cooking, which was the last cookbook I did. And I had another cookbook, which was a packaged book called Chinese Healthy Foods. So I had those 3 books and they all focused, well, Beyond Bok Choy was just Chinese recipes.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. No. And the
And
One Pot Cooking was my last cookbook. And I got a Red Star review for that book in Publishers Weekly. But
wow.
at that time, the publishers were all promoting people that had TV shows and stuff like that. They weren't very interested in promoting someone like me.
And when did that cookbook come out?
I think it was 1999.
1999.
I didn't go on tour on it. I did do some interviews on it and stuff like that. Yeah. It was
And
well reviewed.
and are you thinking of doing another cookbook?
I actually am doing another cookbook. I'm in the middle of working for it. I am doing a cookbook on the cooking of Macau.
Oh,
And it
wow.
has photographs and about 70 recipes. And it's home cooking from Macau. It's not restaurant cooking. And it's it uses Asian spices. And one of the spices we use a lot is turmeric, which is now very popular. It also has desserts. So that book I'm doing for a publisher called Dipper Queen Books. And they want like 50 or 70 by photographs because people don't know. So I'm in the middle of translating the recipes and rewriting them, which I've pretty much done. And I've written an introduction, and now all I have to do is take the photographs because she wants like 50 photographs to illustrate the food, which people don't have an idea of it. But it's home cooking. It's easy to cook at home.
And I don't think there's that many cookbooks on Macanese.
No, there isn't. There isn't. So this
So
would be quite a good cookbook. And
Hmm.
with pictures, I think people would buy it. So now I'm in the process of finishing writing up the recipes. I've got the book pretty much written and photographing it so I can give it to her. But instead of 150 recipes that I wanted to give her, she only wants 70. And she only
Oh,
wants 50 photographs. So it isn't really that much.
you had to pick and choose which recipes you
Yes,
wanted to include.
yes, yes, yeah.
But so that you're not sure on the release date yet.
No, I'm not sure, but I think it'll
Mhm.
be in time for the holidays. But I'm trying to finance my writing because I'm writing fiction now.
Oh,
You didn't
really?
know that? I didn't tell
No,
you that.
no.
So I'm writing a thriller. It's actually really good. It's called One Winner, and it's based in Bavaria. And it's about One Winner is the street address of this inn. And it's about advertising guys in the 60s and Nazi treasure.
That sounds interesting.
It's very interesting. I don't know if it'll sell. So I still have this book which I'm trying to finish, and
No, that's great that you're doing that, and it seems
I'm
like you
really into it. I love my characters. I know how to end the story. It's actually very good.
yes.
I mean, it has elements that would make a perfect movie. It
Hmm.
has lost treasure, Nazis, ad guys, based in Germany in the early to mid 60s. What more do you want?
It has a little bit of everything.
It has a lot that would be make a good movie, and be intriguing.
So you
That's
get
what I'm working on. I mean, that's what I enjoy writing. Let's put it that way.
yes, but so you have that, and you have the cookbook you're working on.
So
Um,
now I put that aside, but I'm actually looking for, I would like to find an agent that would sell that book for me. But
mhm.
publishing has changed a lot. So I don't know about.
Yes,
And
especially
my
if
thriller has a woman protagonist who's a Eurasian from Hong Kong, and she's stuck there in Bavaria,
mm.
trying to be the good corporate wife of the mid to early 60s.
And so it's interesting because you had talked about living in Munich.
That's based on my own
You brought
experience.
in you brought in some of your own
Mhm.
experience.
Yeah, and I had gone to see a dealer there in Munich that all this stolen out. Well, I assume it was stolen out. I don't know. He had a lot
Mm.
of icons, and we went because the guy that took us and introduced him was collecting art from Europe, and he was going back to America, and he brought us there. And we met this guy who had this like apartment crammed full of shit, and he was dealing in all this art. God knows where it came from. And our friend bought some from him. So my story has all of these elements in it. And now I've gotten to a point where I could actually end the story quite easy. But I've digressed and gone into doing my recipes for the book, for the
Oh,
cookbook.
so you haven't quite put the ending on it yet.
On my novel, no. But I know how is going to end.
Yes.
I all I need to do is write it.
Hmm. Was there anything else you'd like to discuss?
So yeah, so basically I wanted the cooking school, and I saw that wasn't going to work, and that's why I made the restaurant.
Just people out here more just wanting to eat at a restaurant and not go to like a cooking class.
The trouble
Uh,
with people get this idea, oh, they're going to open I think a lot of people out here do that too. Oh, they want a restaurant, they're going to open a restaurant, so romantic, blah, blah, blah. But they don't study their market. You can't have a restaurant without knowing your market. Are these people going to come to your restaurant and what are they coming for?
And do you think, like, even today with new restaurants that open up here, I think a lot of them aren't really sure. I mean, there's kind of the usual ones like Claudio or um I don't know how long Noah's has been there, but some of them have kind of come and gone, but
Noise has been there quite a long time. Yeah,
yes. But it is a tough market out here
it is. Yeah. It's
because you
not
don't
easy.
get as much in the
You
winter.
actually have 12 weeks to make your money for the whole year. If you don't make it, if you get 1 or 2 rainy weekends, in that 12 weeks, you're not going to make your money. It's
Yes.
as simple as that. And if
Hmm.
you don't make that money, you can't stay open without putting more money
More money to keep it going.
in. Exactly. Yeah. If you want to keep the people employed.
And yeah, like some of them, a lot of them only open in the summer, and then some of them only open on the weekends. And
Exactly.
there's not
There's
as much
not
year
enough
round.
time. So I don't know. I'm happy I don't have a restaurant, believe me. With COVID, it would have
Yes,
been a total nightmare.
definitely.
Mhm.
Do you think the area has changed quite a bit,
Totally, completely.
even since
Changed a
COVID?
lot, even since COVID. Yeah.
Hmm.
Well,
Do you,
first and foremost, all the restaurant prices are really high,
yes.
even for takeout.
Hmm. And
But I
yeah,
don't
and
know if people are eating out, are they?
I mean, I see people eating out on the weekend at some of those restaurants, but it looks more like tourists and not
Mm-hmm.
locals.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's still people going to the pizza place or to the deli or to the bagel shop,
Yeah.
but besides that, a lot of the other places, I don't know how they do it in the in the winter.
Do you have a $28 burger or something like that somewhere in town? I think insane. I don't care if the burger is made of the best, you know,
Beef.
Wagyu beef. People aren't going to taste the difference. It's just a
Hmm.
burger.
You can do as much as you want with it, but it still shouldn't be that expensive.
No, it shouldn't. And Grace and Grit, they started their burger nights on Thursday and they had a $10 burger. I used to go, and all the people from Oregon used to go because it was a $10 burger. But I think now they have all this fancy food. It's $28 to have pad thai there. It's ridiculous.
Mm.
It's still a takeout place. It's going to pay $28 for pad thai. Or maybe someone is. I don't know.
So someone visiting or someone that doesn't know.
Mhm.
Yeah, because I would get the pad thai for like maybe 11 or 10 at max, but not
At
20. What?
where do you get it at?
I can't find, I mean, I don't get it here, but where I used to live in Montreal, Canada,
Oh, yes, yeah.
I would
You
get
have
it
good
there.
food there.
I really liked it there. It was cold though, but I liked the food. Um,
Mhm.
but even with the housing stuff here, it's tough. And
Yeah,
I
the
don't,
last year I was open at the restaurant, I didn't have a single person that lived in Greenport because they couldn't pay the rents. They all came, well, the nearest was Mattatuck. And then they
yeah.
had to park when they drove in.
Oh, no, I don't know. It's tough
Mhm.
out here now.
So they need to do something about the housing
Yeah.
for people that work in Greenport.
Yeah, especially like some of whether they're working for the city or for some other
Mhm.
service in Greenport, they should have some workforce housing maybe, or
Yeah, like they do in the city, they have subsidized housing. But I don't think they do. I mean,
no,
I know people that have had to move away because they can't get a house.
and there's a long waiting list for
Mhm.
people to get into a place.
Oh, there is?
Yes. So it's just kind of backed up, and yeah, I don't see anything in the near future
Yeah, and
that,
if you live outside of Greenport, you need a car.
yes,
Yeah,
the bus isn't convenient.
it's totally inconvenient.
But I wanted to thank you so much for finishing the podcast episode, and it was really interesting to hear how you grew up and your story and traveling a lot and how you got interested in cooking and eventually made your way all the way out here, but all the involvement with your cookbooks and the restaurants and also what you're currently working on now is great. So I want to thank you so much.
Great, thank you. I want to thank you. Take
Thank you.
care.
Thank you. You too. Take care.
Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 23 with Rosa Ross. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast. See you next time.